Imagine you are standing on the frozen edge of Siberia's Ural Mountains. The sky is bruised purple, the air so sharp it burns your lungs. A construction crew, working in near silence, lowers their drills into a block of permafrost, preparing to blast through what they assumed was just another section of ancient ice. But when the drill bites down, it doesn't strike stone. It thuds against something hollow, something unnatural. The foreman leans over, his gloved hands trembling as he brushes away shards of crystalline frost. Through the pale translucence of ice, a face slowly appears, frozen mid-expression. The skin stretched, eyes clouded but eerily intact. A young man. Then another face beside him. And another, encased in what looked like a naturally formed column of ice. 5 bodies, seated as though arranged, their clothes preserved in ghostly detail. Jackets, scarves, even the faint color of wool hats remain visible. They were not scattered by avalanche, nor buried by accident. They were arranged. The discovery made in February 2021 would send shockwaves through Russia, reopening one of Siberia's most baffling cold cases. Because these were the 5 university students who had disappeared without a trace 9 years earlier, in the dead of winter, on a hiking trip across the Urals. And the way they were found was unlike anything investigators had ever seen. The students were young, ambitious, and full of the kind of restless courage that drives people into places most would never go. Nikita Volkov, 22, a mechanical engineering student. Tall, quiet. The kind who carried notebooks filled with sketches of machines he hoped one day to build. His sister described him as someone who never wasted words, but never wasted time either. Anya Morozova, 21, studying journalism. She was curious, bold, and always carried a small camera, a battered Nikon her father had given her. She documented everything, from dorm room pranks to sunsets on campus rooftops. Her lens was her voice. Dmitry, Dima Petrov, 23, the oldest of the group, majoring in geology. He was the leader by default. Rugged, dependable, and drawn to the raw earth. He dreamed of one day writing papers on Siberian tectonics, of mapping places few had set foot. Irina Sokolova, 20 student. Friends said she had a habit of listening so intently, it was unnerving. She carried her grandmother's wool scarf on every trip, striped in red and black, a charm against the cold. Oleg Denisov, 22, the joker, the life of the group. He studied literature and philosophy, quoting Dostoevsky when drunk and Pushkin when sober. He carried a leather-bound notebook full of half-finished poems, all addressed to someone no one ever identified. Together, they were inseparable. Each had experience hiking. Each had been tested by cold, fatigue, and long nights in the wilderness. Friends called them the Winter Five, because they seemed to relish journeys into the harshest months, when most students stayed indoors. But this trip, February 2012, was meant to be their most ambitious. They planned to trek from Vizay, a remote settlement at the edge of the Urals, deep into mountain passes that locals avoided in winter. They would cover over 200 kilometers, documenting geology, taking photographs, and proving, perhaps to themselves, that youth could conquer even Siberia's wrath. It was a trip they would never return from. February 12, 2012, the group checked into a small logging outpost in Vizay, their last known lodging. The owner, a wiry man named Sergei, later recalled them as in high spirits, loud like all students. They bought bread, cheese, dried fish, and filled out a guest log. That evening, they phoned their families. Nikita called his sister in Novosibirsk, promising to return before her birthday. Anya sent a final text to her father. "Signal will be gone tomorrow, don't worry." February 13th. They departed Vizay in the early morning, heavy packs strapped to their backs. Temperatures hovered at -18 degrees Celsius. They logged their route with the local hiking board, expected to send a telegram by February 24th. Upon return, February 15th, A hunter named Alexei spotted them at the base of the Urals. He shared a cigarette with Dmitri and remembered Anya taking a photograph of the horizon. He was the last outsider to ever see them alive. After that, silence. By February 26th, no telegram arrived. Families began calling authorities. At first, local officials dismissed concerns. Delays were common. Harsh weather often slowed hikers. But when March came and still no word, a formal search began. The first helicopter teams flew over the Urals, combing white ridges and black forests. Dogs were brought, noses pressed to snow. They caught traces near a frozen river, then nothing. As if the group had stepped into air, volunteers scoured the valleys. A sled team traced the path of old footprints until the tracks vanished under fresh drifts. Journal entries and receipts confirmed their last presence in Visay. But beyond that, the trail fractured. There was no campsite, no torn fabric, no discarded food. Just emptiness. Weeks turned into months. Snow melted, rivers swelled, and still, nothing. By summer, the case was fading from headlines. Russia, with its long list of tragedies, moved on. The families did not. Nikita's sister lit candles on his birthday, waiting by the phone for a call that never came. Irina's mother kept her scarf folded on the chair beside her bed, refusing to wash. The scent of wood smoke still clinging faintly. Oleg's notebook, a second, backup one, was found in his dorm desk, with a poem unfinished. Ending mid-sentence, the press called it another Dyatlov, a reference to the infamous 1959 tragedy in the same mountains, where 9 hikers died mysteriously. But this case had even less to hold on to. No bodies, no tent, nothing. For 9 years, the Ural winds erased their memory from the landscape. But time has a way of hiding things in Siberia, and then, violently, revealing them. February 2021. A construction project outside Visay began drilling into permafrost to install support pylons. Workers expected nothing unusual. Siberia often concealed strange relics, mammoth bones, ancient tools. But what they found that morning, sealed in a vertical tower of ice, stopped them cold. The column rose nearly 3 meters, perfectly natural at first glance, an accidental monument of frozen water shaped over years of thaw and refreeze. But trapped inside, clear as glass, were 5 human forms. Faces preserved, clothes still intact. They were arranged in a circle, backs to the ice, legs folded as though sitting. Oleg's notebook was clutched to his chest, the leather cracked, but visible. Irina's red and black scarf fluttered faintly within the frost. Locked mid-motion, the ice had entombed them like a display. Not scattered by nature. Seated, posed. The first investigators on scene called it the most unsettling tableau they had ever witnessed. One officer reportedly refused to approach, muttering prayers under his breath. Forensic teams arrived, carefully cutting blocks of ice to transport. Each movement was slow, deliberate. The world now had 5 bodies to study, but also 5 questions multiplying faster than answers. How had they all died together? Why were they arranged this way? And who or what had placed them there? The silence of 9 years had broken. But the echoes it released were darker than anyone expected. As the blocks of ice were lifted into refrigerated trucks, one investigator leaned closer to the column, shining his flashlight into the frozen translucence. Behind Anya's shoulder, pressed faintly into the ice, was something no one could explain. The outline of a handprint, too large to be hers, and facing inward, as if someone on the outside had held it there while sealing her in. Imagine peering into the heart of an ice tomb, your breath fogging against a surface that has preserved not just bodies, but secrets. The frozen figures stare out from behind their glassy prison, as if trapped mid-thought, mid-fear, mid-surrender. This was not the wilderness scattering its victims. This was arrangement. And arrangement met intent. In February 2021, 9 years after 5 students had vanished into the Ural Mountains, their rediscovery reopened not just grief, but suspicion. The ice tower was dismantled slowly, each layer shaved down and catalogued. Forensic scientists worked with diamond saws, careful not to damage clothing or flesh preserved within. The bodies were transported to Yekaterinburg's regional morgue in refrigerated crates. What they found on the first inspections was chilling: clothing intact, jackets zipped, scarves wrapped. No signs of frantic struggle or tearing. Faces preserved. Eyelids closed on some, slightly open on others. The skin pale, waxen. Hands folded. Except for Oleg, whose fingers were curled tight around his notebook. Autopsies revealed minimal decomposition, a gift of permafrost. But beneath the skin, fractures told a darker story. Dmitri's ribs were broken, not from collapse or falling ice, but from blunt force trauma. Irina's hyoid bone, at the base of the neck, was fractured, often a sign of strangulation. Nikita's femur bore spiral fractures, consistent with twisting force. The official report listed cause of death undetermined for all 5. But behind closed doors, forensic examiners admitted these injuries were inconsistent with exposure. Alone. Someone had hurt them. News of the rediscovery spread like wildfire. Families who had grieved in silence were dragged back into the storm. Anya's father collapsed during interviews. Clutching the Nikon camera returned to him from evidence. The camera's film had long degraded, but the physical object alone was enough to shatter him. Irina's mother received her daughter's scarf in a sealed bag. She pressed it to her face, whispering that the smell of smoke was still there, still clinging after 9 years in the ice. For the parents, the bodies were not closure. They were proof that something terrible, deliberate, had been done. Investigators pieced together what little remained of the students' final days. February 13th to 15th, 2012. They were last seen near the Ural foothills, laughing, smoking, taking photographs. February 16th to 20th. Estimated time of death. Weather data confirmed plunging temperatures of -20 degrees Celsius, with wind chills even harsher. February 21st to 24th. If alive, this is when they should have returned. Instead, silence. The question wasn't just when they died, but where. And most of all, why were they moved? Because the tower of ice where they were discovered wasn't natural shelter. It was kilometers from their last known path. To transport 5 bodies into a vertical shaft of permafrost, arrange them in seated positions, and leave them, this was not accident. This was staging. Rescuers from 2012 were re-interviewed. One detail stood out. On the second week of searching, a helicopter pilot had spotted a depression in the snow about 12 kilometers off the main route. He reported it, but the storm forced them back. By the time ground teams arrived days later, the depression was filled in by drifting snow. Nothing more was said. Now, looking back, investigators wondered if that depression had been the site where the students' bodies were first placed, before winter buried them deeper, before ice swallowed them into permanence. Among the possessions recovered were fragments of their past. Oleg's notebook, though water-damaged, still carried faint ink. One legible line read, "It is colder inside than outside." The silence is wrong. Dmitri's geological field log contained measurements up until February 15th. The final entry stopped mid-sentence, pencil mark trailing off the page. Anya's Nikon camera, though its film degraded, still had her fingerprints etched into the metal grip, frozen there by condensation. These items painted a picture of routine turning into rupture. The question was, who had joined them in that rupture? Media compared the case relentlessly to the Dyatlov Pass incident. Some claimed avalanche, others hypothermia-induced madness, others spoke of Soviet-era experiments. But investigators focused on something simpler, darker, more human. There are reclusive hunters in the Urals, men who avoid civilization for decades. Some are territorial, violent toward intruders. Did the students cross paths with one such figure? The Urals have long been home to hidden testing grounds. Could they have stumbled onto restricted land, silenced for what they saw? Was there a fracture within the group, a fight spiraling out of control, leaving injuries that others tried to hide by staging the bodies? Each theory fit some evidence, but none fit all. The fractures in bones suggested violence. The careful arrangement in ice suggested ritual. And the handprint, faint in the frozen wall, suggested an outsider's presence. In March 2021, a new expedition retraced the students' intended route. Armed with GPS, dogs, and ground-penetrating radar, they searched the valleys near Vizay. Once more, the cold was unrelenting. Wind shrieked through tree lines like whistles. Snow packed into every crease of clothing, numbing skin. Even for trained officers, survival was grueling. One team discovered remnants of a fire pit buried beneath snow layers, charred wood that carbon dating placed at 2012. Near it, a spoon with Nikita's initials scratched faintly. They had camped. Here, they had been alive, together, around this fire. But 300 meters away, something else was found, a rope. Thick, frayed, frozen solid. It was tied around a tree, its other end trailing into a buried mound of snow. When dug out, the mound revealed nothing but disturbed earth. A shallow pit. Empty. The arrangement of the bodies haunted investigators. Why seated? Why intact? Why with symbolic items, scarf, notebook, camera, all displayed, not discarded? One forensic psychologist suggested the staging resembled a preservation ritual, not religious but personal. Whoever did this wanted them not erased, but remembered or displayed. Another expert pointed to the fractures. These were not random blows. They were targeted. Sternum, femur, hyoid, disabling strikes, but not instantly fatal. Suggesting prolonged control, restraint, suffering. By April 2021, the story dominated Russian news. Families gave interviews, demanding justice. Crowds left flowers and candles outside the students' university. Oleg's mother told cameras, "My son's poems spoke of love, not death. Whoever did this, read his last line. They silenced his last word. I want them found." But behind public grief, authorities remained silent. Too many details were unresolved, and the weight of Dyatlov's legacy loomed. Officials feared hysteria, conspiracy, and loss of control. So much was unanswered. In May 2021, a private investigator hired by Nikita's sister obtained access to unreleased photographs from the forensic recovery. Among them was an image showing Oleg's hand gripping his notebook. When magnified, beneath his frozen fingernails was something small, dark. Not dirt, not ice. But fibers. Fibers from a heavy wool coat, green, military issue. And none of the 5 students had owned one. Imagine holding a frozen notebook, its pages fused together by time, its last lines written by a hand that knew it would never see another sunrise. Beneath those fingers, forensic teams found fibers, coarse, green, unmistakably military. The 5 students had not simply frozen. They had not simply vanished. They had been taken, and whoever touched them last had left traces of themselves inside that tomb of ice. The revelation of wool fibers threw gasoline on already burning speculation. Russia's military presence in the Urals has long been shrouded in secrecy. Since the Soviet era, restricted zones and classified test facilities have dotted Siberia's wilderness. Reporters uncovered declassified documents showing that, in 2012, small unit exercises had taken place less than 50 kilometers from where the students vanished. Officially, these were navigation drills. But some locals swore they saw convoys of trucks moving into the woods at night. Did the Winter 5 stumble too close to something forbidden? The theory was plausible, but with one problem. If the military had silenced them, why leave them so carefully posed? Why preserve their bodies rather than erase them completely? Unless the posing wasn't military at all, but personal. In June 2021, forensic examiners revisited the bodies with new imaging. They discovered further anomalies: ligature marks, thin abrasions around Irina's wrists and ankles consistent with rope, dental fractures. Nikita's molars were cracked as though from blunt trauma to the jaw. Foreign soil embedded under Dmitri's fingernails was clay inconsistent with the Urals. Surface geology. The clay matched samples found in an abandoned mine 15 kilometers away. A mine officially sealed in the late 1980s. It was no longer a question of if foul play occurred. It was a matter of who and why. By late summer 2021, investigators launched a second expedition into the Urals, targeting the old mine. Journalists were barred, but locals spoke of convoys heading north, equipment dragged into wilderness, and campfires glowing in valleys at night. One officer, speaking anonymously, described the mine entrance: timber beams collapsing, tunnels sealed by ice. But inside, they found evidence of habitation: empty tins of food, a rusted camp stove, and cigarette butts dated by packaging to early 2010s. Someone had been there around the same time the students vanished. Further in, scratched into a wall, was a crude carving: 5 stick figures, hands bound. Even after 9 years, their voices lingered in fragments. Oleg's notebook, partially deciphered with infrared scanning, revealed one final passage: "We are not alone. He watches when the fire dies. He wants us to sit, to wait, to be still." Anya's Nikon, though its film had degraded, was subjected to advanced chemical restoration. One frame emerged faintly: 5 silhouettes near a fire, with a 6th figure blurred at the edge, tall, hooded, watching. The discovery of that frame sent shivers through even the most hardened investigators, because it confirmed the students had been photographed before they vanished. Someone was close enough to enter the frame. Someone wanted proof. At this point, 3 theories crystallized. The hermit theory: a lone recluse, perhaps a deserter or outlaw, living near the mine. Territorial, paranoid, violent. He stumbled across the students, or they stumbled across him. The rogue soldier theory: not the military at large, but an individual, ex-military, with training, equipment, and obsession. The green fibers, the controlled violence, the staging, suggested discipline, not madness. The ritual theory: the seating, the arrangement, the preserved belongings suggested something more symbolic. The perpetrator wasn't erasing the students, but creating a tableau, almost a shrine. The most terrifying possibility was that all 3 were true: a soldier who deserted, who retreated into the wilderness, and who ritualized control over those who wandered into his domain. In September 2021, journalists tracked down hunters from Vizhai, who recalled unsettling encounters in the years after the students disappeared. One described finding his traps destroyed, replaced with crude warnings scratched into trees: "Leave." Another recalled waking in his cabin to find his rifle missing, returned 2 weeks later polished clean. A third, a woman gathering firewood, swore she saw a man at dusk, tall, wrapped in a green military coat, standing motionless on a ridge, watching. When she called out, he vanished into the pines. No name, no confirmed identity, just a presence. They called him the Watcher of the Urals. In October, deeper excavations of the mine uncovered something investigators had not expected: scraps of fabric frozen into the clay. They were modern, synthetic, part of a tent. Analysis matched them to a brand the students had carried. Their tent had not vanished with the wind, as once believed. It had been brought underground, concealed. Beside it, in the mud, was another object: a pair of spectacles, metal-rimmed, small, not belonging to any of the 5. Whoever lived in that mine had taken not only their lives, But their belongings, the return of evidence, reopened wounds. Irina's mother, upon hearing of rope burns, broke down on national television. They tied my daughter like an animal. Someone watched her die. Someone sat her in that ice like a doll. Nikita's sister demanded the government name suspects, accusing officials of silence. We were told they were victims of weather. Now we know it was hands. Hands did this. Whose hands? But answers were still withheld. Criminal psychologists pointed to the posing of the bodies as key. Staging was not about concealment. It was about message. One profile suggested the perpetrator had a fixation on control, forcing the victims to appear calm, seated, even in death. Arranging symbolic items was his way of declaring authorship, like a signature. The ice tower, then, was not accident, it was preservation. The killer wanted them seen, eventually, his work discovered. Like art in a gallery of frost. But why wait 9 years for discovery? Why entomb them rather than display them immediately? Unless he was still there, watching the place where he left them, waiting for others to come. In December 2021, another search team entered the mine for final sweeps. They advanced through collapsing shafts, lights cutting into centuries of darkness. At the deepest point, they found a narrow passage ending in a crude barricade of wood and stone. When dismantled, inside was a small chamber. On the floor, a rusted metal cot, a stove, empty cans. And on the wall, in charcoal, words scrawled in jagged Cyrillic. 5 sit still. 5 wait forever. Beneath it, pinned with a knife, was a strip of red and black fabric. Irina's scarf, imagine. Walking into a chamber sealed for years, your flashlight trembling as it grazes over a wall of crude writing. 5 sit still. 5 wait forever. The scarf of a dead girl pinned beneath a knife. The realization that what you thought was wilderness was in fact someone's design. The case of the Winter 5 was no longer a mystery of nature. It was a story of a man. In January 2022, investigators quietly announced they were pursuing a lead, an individual once stationed in the Urals during the early 2000s. His name, Captain Viktor Sidorov, a decorated engineer in the Russian military. Discharged in 2008 for what records vaguely called psychological instability. Neighbors recalled him as disciplined, solitary, a man who walked in precise steps, speaking little. After his dismissal, he vanished. No address, no forwarding. Rumors spread he had gone into the wilderness, unwilling to return to civilian life. Military records confirmed he had been trained in survival, restraint techniques, and geological surveying. He knew the mountains better than anyone. He also owned a green wool coat, standard issue. It was the fibers beneath Oleg's nails that tied him, ghost-like, to the students. Experts painted Sidorov as a man fractured by rejection. Cast out from an institution that had given his life structure, he retreated into ritual. Control became his only purpose. The carvings, the staged bodies, the ice tower, they were his attempt to impose order on chaos. 5 students stumbling into his terrain were not hikers. To him, they were intruders disrupting a perfect solitude, and he had made them sit still, forever. Investigators reconstructed the probable sequence of their final days, using journals, forensic evidence, and the restored photograph. February 15th, 2012. The students camp near the foothills. A stranger approaches, tall, in a green coat. He does not attack. He watches. February 16th. The group moves closer to the old mine, unknowingly entering his domain. Oleg writes in his notebook, "It is colder inside than outside. The silence is wrong." Night of February 16th. They are ambushed. Perhaps first threatened, then bound. Rope burns on wrists confirm restraint. February 17th. They are held in the mine, forced to sit, documented by Anya's camera. Injuries are inflicted one by one, sternum crushed, jaw fractured, bone twisted, not immediately lethal. Controlled suffering. February 18th to 19th. Death by exposure, by trauma, by deliberate strangulation. Their leader, Dmitri, likely last. Watching the others perish. Aftermath. Sidorov arranges their bodies, transports them into the permafrost, sealing them into a natural shaft. He poses them upright, their belongings intact, a message for the world he knows will one day find them. It was not madness without method. It was obsession. Once identified, Sidorov became the most wanted man in the Urals, but finding him was like chasing smoke. Searches combed abandoned cabins, mines and hunting trails. They found traces, footprints, fires still warm, caches of supplies buried under snow. He was always one step ahead. Villagers whispered sightings. A tall man at dusk, standing at tree lines. A face glimpsed in a window, gone when they turned. One child described him as the soldier in the forest. But Sidorov was never captured. The wilderness was his ally. He dissolved into it like mist. Without a body, there was no arrest. Instead, investigators presented evidence in absence, reconstructing their case in a cold courtroom for the families. Photographs of rope burns, fibers beneath fingernails, soil matching the mine. The carving on the wall, the scarf, the notebook. Experts testified that all signs pointed to Sidorov. His profile, his training, his disappearance, it aligned with every mark he left. But in Russia's legal system, shadows are not enough. The case remained officially unresolved, filed as suspected homicide, perpetrator unknown. For the families, justice was denied. The students were finally laid to rest in a joint ceremony. 5 coffins draped in snow, lowered into earth under gray skies. Hundreds attended, strangers among them, compelled by the story's haunting grip. Irina's scarf was buried with her. Oleg's notebook, its last words blurred, was placed in his coffin. Anya's Nikon camera was set atop her casket. Nikita's sister read a letter aloud, promising to finish her brother's studies in his honor. Dmitri's parents stood silent, stone-faced, as if weathered into the same endurance as the mountains that had claimed him. But closure never came. Even now, hikers in the Urals speak of unease. They tell of campsites disturbed overnight, supplies rearranged neatly instead of stolen, as if someone checked their discipline. Some report seeing a tall figure at the edge of tree lines, unmoving. Watching. No one has proven Sidorov survived past 2022. But the wilderness holds secrets as deep as the ice. And men like him, men who thrive in solitude and silence, can disappear indefinitely. The tragedy of the Winter 5 was not the cold. It was not the mountains. It was a man, broken by his own need for order, who turned the wilderness into his shrine. Their bodies, locked in ice, became his statement to the world, that even in death, he controlled how they sat, how they faced, how they would be remembered. And in the end, perhaps that is the most chilling truth. Not that they were lost to nature, but that they were found because one man wanted them found, arranged like artifacts in a museum of silence. So when you think of the Ural Mountains, think of the wind-carving valleys, the snow-burying paths. Think of 5 students, young and bright, who vanished into a wilderness they believed they could conquer. And remember, somewhere out there, maybe still alive, maybe only a ghost, is the Watcher of the Urals, a man who believed that silence was stronger than life, and that 5 students would sit still and wait forever.